Police knock on the door of a quiet suburban home on an ordinary afternoon in 2025. When the woman answers, they deliver a message that will shatter everything she knows about herself. Ma'am, you're not who you think you are. You're a missing person. You're Michelle Marie Newton. For 43 years, a father searched for his 3-year-old daughter who vanished without a trace. For 43 years, law enforcement agencies across the country hunted for clues. For 43 years, missing person posters circulated with the face of a little girl in a sailor outfit, her gap-toothed smile frozen in time. But here's what nobody knew. The daughter was never actually missing. She was living her life, completely unaware that somewhere, hundreds of miles away, a father was waiting for a phone call that would bring her home. This isn't a story about a kidnapping by a stranger in a van. This isn't about a child plucked from a playground by someone dangerous. This is something far more complex, far more unsettling, because the person who took her was the one person she trusted most in the world. How does a 3-year-old disappear in broad daylight and live an entire life under a different name? How does a mother erase her daughter's entire identity and build a new existence from scratch? And how does a case that was closed, dismissed, and forgotten suddenly crack wide open 4 decades later because of a single phone call to a tip line? Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The truth about what happened in the spring of 1983 is more complicated than any detective could have imagined. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the most dangerous disappearances are the ones that happen right in front of our eyes. Louisville, Kentucky, 1983. Spring had arrived with the promise of new beginnings. The air was warming. Trees were budding. And for Joseph Newton and his wife, Deborah, everything seemed to be falling into place. Joseph, a hard-working Kentucky man with steady employment and strong family ties, had built what he thought was a solid life. His wife, Deborah, was a young mother, and together they had a 3-year-old daughter named Michelle Marie Newton. Born on October 5, 1979, Michelle, or Shelley, as her family called her, was the kind of child who lit up every room she entered. With her blonde hair, bright eyes, and that gap-toothed smile that made everyone she met want to protect her, she was the center of her father's world. The Newton household appeared normal from the outside, but beneath the surface, tensions were beginning to form cracks that nobody could see. Deborah had mentioned wanting a change, a fresh start. She talked about opportunities in Georgia, about new jobs, about preparing a better life for their family. Joseph didn't question it. Why would he? This was his wife, the mother of his child. When Deborah told him she had found work in Georgia and wanted to go ahead to set up their new home while Joseph wrapped up affairs in Louisville, it seemed reasonable. It seemed like the logical next step for a young family looking to improve their circumstances. In early April 1983, Deborah packed bags for herself and 3-year-old Michelle. She told Joseph she would call when they arrived. She told him to follow when everything was ready. She kissed him goodbye, put Michelle in the car, and drove away from their Louisville home. Joseph watched them go, completely unaware that he was watching his daughter for the last time, completely unaware that the next 43 years would be defined by that single moment of trust. Days turned into weeks. Joseph called the number Deborah had given him. No answer. He called again and again. Still nothing. When he finally made the trip to Georgia, following the address Deborah had provided, he found nothing. No new house, no new job, no wife, no daughter, just empty promises and an address that led nowhere. At first, Joseph assumed there had been a miscommunication. Perhaps Deborah had given him the wrong address. Perhaps she was staying somewhere temporarily. But as days became weeks and weeks stretched into months, the truth began to settle in with suffocating weight. They were gone. Deborah and Michelle had vanished, and Joseph had no idea where to even begin looking. When a child goes missing, law enforcement has a protocol. There are systems in place, databases to check, Amber Alerts to issue. But in 1983, those systems were still being developed. The technology we take for granted today, instant communication, nationwide databases, facial recognition, didn't exist. Joseph Newton did what any desperate father would do. He went to the police. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office opened a missing persons case. Because Deborah was Michelle's mother, this wasn't classified as a stranger abduction. This was custodial interference, a legal term that sounds almost benign compared to reality. A child was missing, a father was searching, and somewhere out there, a mother had decided to erase an entire family from her daughter's memory. Missing person flyers were created. They featured a photograph of 3-year-old Michelle in her little sailor outfit, that innocent smile captured in time. The flyers describe her as 3 years old, blonde hair, bright eyes. Last seen in Louisville, Kentucky, in April 1983. The flyers were distributed across Kentucky, Georgia, and neighboring states. They were posted in police stations, grocery stores, gas stations. Joseph personally handed them out to anyone who would take one. He called local news stations. He spoke to reporters. He did everything within his power to find his daughter. By 1986, 3 years after Michelle's disappearance, a local news crew from WOKY in Louisville sat down with Joseph. The footage is haunting. You can see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of years of searching with no answers. The interviewer asked him a simple question. Wouldn't you want your child back? At least to see her grow up? Joseph's response was immediate, his voice thick with emotion. Of course. I just want to know she's okay. I want her to know I never stopped looking. The case grew bigger than just local searches. Deborah Newton was indicted for custodial interference. An FBI warrant was issued for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. At one point, Deborah Newton made it onto the FBI's top 8 most wanted parental kidnapping fugitives list. Think about that for a moment. The FBI, with all their resources and reach, considered this case significant enough to put Deborah Newton on a most wanted list. They believed she was out there, hiding, living under a different identity with a child who had no idea her entire life was built on a lie. But despite the FBI's involvement, despite the missing person posters, despite Joseph's relentless search, the trail went cold. There were no sightings, no tips that led anywhere. Deborah and Michelle had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. By the late 1980s, the case began to fade from public attention. New missing person cases took priority. Resources were redirected. Joseph continued searching, but the official investigation began to slow. Then, in a move that would prove devastating to Joseph's hopes, the case took a turn for the worse. In 2000, 17 years after Michelle's disappearance, the Commonwealth of Kentucky attempted to reach Joseph Newton for case updates. They couldn't locate him. Whether it was a change of address, a miscommunication, or a simple bureaucratic failure, the result was catastrophic. Because the Commonwealth couldn't reach the victim's father, the case was dismissed. Let that sink in. After 17 years of searching, the case was closed not because Michelle had been found, but because of a paperwork issue. 5 years later, in 2005, Michelle Newton was removed from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's database. Her entry was recalled due to what officials termed inaccurate information. Deborah's warrant for custodial interference was similarly recalled. For all official purposes, Michelle Newton ceased to be a missing person. The system had given up. The case was closed. Deborah Newton, wherever she was, had successfully disappeared. But Joseph Newton never stopped believing his daughter was out there. While Joseph searched, Deborah was busy building an entirely new life. We may never know all the details of how she managed to erase her and Michelle's identities so completely, but the fact that she succeeded for over 4 decades tells us she was methodical, careful, and determined. At some point, Deborah remarried. She built a new identity as Sharon Neely. She and Michelle moved to Florida, eventually settling in Marion County, a place about as far from Louisville, Kentucky, as you could get while staying in the continental United States. Florida, sunshine retirement communities, a place where people go to start over. The Villages, where Deborah eventually settled, is one of the largest retirement communities in America. It's a place where neighbors are friendly but not intrusive, where people mind their own business, where someone with a past could blend in seamlessly. Deborah, now Sharon, lived what appeared to be a quiet, normal life. She had a new husband who seemingly had no idea about her past. She had neighbors who knew her as Sharon, the friendly woman who walked her dog every afternoon. She attended community events, shopped at local stores, and lived the kind of peaceful retirement life that many people dream about. And Michelle? She grew up believing the life Deborah had created was the only life she'd ever known. She had no memory of Louisville, no memory of Joseph, no memory of being 3 years old when everything changed. Think about what that means. Michelle attended school under a different name. She made friends, graduated, possibly went to college, started a career, maybe got married, all while completely unaware that somewhere a man was searching for her, unaware that her face had been on missing person posters, unaware that she had a father who had never stopped loving her. She had no reason to question her identity. Why would she? The woman she called mother had raised her, cared for her, been there for every milestone. To Michelle, Deborah wasn't a kidnapper. She was just Mom. This is what makes parental abduction so insidious. Unlike stranger abductions, where the trauma is immediate and obvious, parental abduction creates a different kind of damage. The child grows up without knowing they're a victim. They live entire lives built on falsehoods they can't even recognize. For Michelle, growing up in Florida, life was normal. She had no reason to Google her own name. Why would anyone? She had no reason to check missing person databases or question the stories her mother had told her about their family history. Deborah had successfully erased the past, or so she thought. But here's the thing about the past. No matter how deeply you bury it, no matter how carefully you cover your tracks, the truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. And for Deborah Newton, that moment came in the form of a single phone call to a Crime Stoppers tip line. In 2015, something happened that would change everything. A family member, someone who had never forgotten about little Michelle Newton, reached out to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. They asked a simple question. Whatever happened to that case? Whatever happened to Michelle? The detective who received that inquiry could have easily dismissed it. The case had been closed for over a decade. Michelle had been removed from missing person databases. Officially, there was nothing to investigate. But the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office had a philosophy, one that would prove crucial. Chief Deputy Colonel Steve Healy later explained it. No family seeking help is ever turned away. They believed in keeping cases alive, in never giving up on families who still held out hope. So they reopened the case. In 2016, more than 3 decades after Michelle's disappearance, a grand jury re-indicted Deborah Newton on custodial interference charges. The warrant was reactivated. The search was officially back on. But reopening a case and solving it are two very different things. The detective assigned to review the file faced an enormous challenge. How do you find someone who has successfully hidden for over 30 years? How do you track down a woman who has likely changed her name, her identity, possibly even her appearance? The answer, as it turned out, wouldn't come from advanced forensics or complex detective work. It would come from an ordinary citizen who happened to notice something unusual and decided to make a phone call. In 2024, 1 year before the breakthrough that would solve the case, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children made one last push. On Michelle Newton's 45th birthday, October 5th, 2024, they posted to their Facebook page. The post featured 2 images side by side. On the left, the original photo of 3-year-old Michelle in her sailor outfit, that gap-toothed smile. On the right, an age-progressed image showing what Michelle might look like at 45 years old. The forensic artist had carefully projected how her features might have matured. The shape of her face, the set of her eyes, the structure of her cheekbones. The post read, Michelle Newton has been missing for 41 years. If you have any information about her whereabouts, please contact us immediately. The post was shared hundreds of times. It reached people across the country. And somewhere in Florida, someone saw it and had a thought. That woman looks familiar. We don't know exactly who called the Crime Stoppers tip line. Their identity has been protected as a standard for tip line informants. But we know what they said. There's a woman living in Marion County, Florida, who looks exactly like that age-progressed photo. She goes by the name Sharon Neely. That single phone call set in motion a chain of events that would bring a 43-year search to an end. Detectives with the U.S. Marshals Task Force obtained a recent photograph of the woman known as Sharon Neely. They compared it to the 1983 photograph of Deborah Newton. The resemblance was undeniable, but resemblance isn't proof. They needed to be certain. A Jefferson County detective reached out to Deborah Newton's sister, who still lived in Louisville. The sister agreed to provide a DNA sample. When the lab results came back, they showed a 99.9% familial match to the woman living in Florida as Sharon Neely. They had found her. After 43 years, they had found Deborah Newton. But the investigation still faced a crucial question. Where was Michelle? Was she even still alive? Had she stayed with Deborah all these years, or had something else happened along the way? Detectives began quietly surveilling the home in the villages where Sharon Neely lived. They watched her daily routines. They documented her activities. They confirmed that she lived with a husband who appeared to have no knowledge of her past. And then they discovered something remarkable. Michelle was alive. Not only alive, but living her own life in Florida, not far from where Deborah had settled. The detective team now faced a delicate situation. They needed to arrest Deborah, but they also needed to inform Michelle about who she really was. How do you tell someone that their entire identity is false? How do you tell a woman in her mid-40s that she's been listed as a missing person for most of her life? The plan was set. Deborah would be arrested first. Then, separately, detectives would visit Michelle and reveal the truth about her identity. On November 24th, 2025, the operation began. Body camera footage from the Marion County Sheriff's Office captures the moment that ended Deborah Newton's decades-long disappearance. The video has since gone viral, viewed millions of times online, because of its sheer ordinariness contrasted with the extraordinary circumstances. It's a sunny afternoon in the villages. Deborah Newton, known to neighbors as Sharon Neely, is walking her dog. She's chatting with a neighbor across the street, laughing about something mundane. It's the kind of scene that plays out in retirement communities across America every single day. The neighbor makes a joke, something about police coming for Sharon. They both laugh. It's clearly a friendly, light-hearted exchange between people who know each other well. Then, police cruisers pull up to the house. The neighbor's laughter dies in her throat. Deborah's face goes pale. Multiple deputies emerge from the vehicles and approach. One deputy addresses her directly. Sharon Neely? Or should we call you Deborah Newton? What happens next is captured in stark detail. Deborah's hand begins to shake. She repeats, over and over, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. Her voice has the quality of someone who has rehearsed this denial for decades, who has perhaps imagined this moment in nightmares but never truly believed it would come. The deputies are professional, almost gentle. Ma'am, we have a warrant for your arrest. We need you to come with us. Deborah's husband comes out of the house, confused and alarmed. He reaches for the dog's leash, his face a massive shock. He has no idea what's happening. To him, this is his wife Sharon, a woman he's built a life with, a woman he thought he knew. What's going on? He demands. What is she supposed to have done? The deputies don't elaborate on scene. We'll explain everything at the station, sir. As they escort Deborah to the patrol car, the body camera captures her face. There's no anger there, no defiance, just a kind of exhausted resignation, as if she's been waiting for this moment for 43 years, and part of her is almost relieved it's finally arrived. The neighbor who was joking moments earlier stands in the street, hand over her mouth, unable to process what she's witnessing. The friendly woman who walked her dog every afternoon, who smiled and waved and seemed so normal, was actually a fugitive wanted for kidnapping her own daughter. Deborah is placed in the back of the patrol car. The door closes. The cruiser pulls away from a quiet street in the villages, taking with it the carefully constructed identity of Sharon Neely. Within hours, Deborah Newton is processed and booked. The charges: custodial interference, a felony that carries no statute of limitations in Kentucky. It doesn't matter that 43 years have passed. Under Kentucky law, parental kidnapping is a crime that never expires. Deborah is extradited back to Louisville, back to the place where this story began in 1983. She will face the same court system she has evaded for 4 decades. But that's only half of the story. Because at the same moment Deborah is being arrested, another team of investigators is making a different kind of visit. They're going to see Michelle. Imagine coming home from work on an ordinary day. You pull into your driveway, tired, thinking about what to make for dinner. You're expecting a quiet evening, maybe watching TV, maybe calling a friend. Instead, there are police cars parked outside your house. Detectives waiting at your door. This is what happened to Michelle. When the detectives identified themselves and asked if they could come inside, Michelle's first thought was that something terrible had happened. Had there been an accident? Was someone hurt? The detectives sat her down. They explained, as gently as possible, that they had information about her identity, that the name she had been using her entire life wasn't her real name, that the woman she knew as her mother had actually kidnapped her when she was 3 years old, that somewhere in Kentucky, a man named Joseph Newton had been searching for her for 43 years. Michelle's reaction, according to Chief Deputy Colonel Steve Healy, was one of complete shock. She told us she didn't realize she was a victim until she saw everything she had missed, Healy later explained to reporters. Think about what that means. Michelle had lived an entire life. For decades of memories, relationships, experiences, all built on a foundation that had just crumbled beneath her feet. Every story her mother had told her about their family history was a lie. Every explanation for why they had no extended family, why they never visited certain places, why her mother sometimes seemed nervous about paperwork or official documents. All of it now made terrible sense. The detective showed her the missing person flyer from 1983. That little girl in the sailor outfit, smiling with her gap-toothed grin. That's you, they told her. That's Michelle Newton. They showed her the age-progressed image that had been created by forensic artists. The resemblance to her own face was unmistakable. They told her about Joseph, about how he had never stopped searching, about the interviews he had given to local news, about the years he spent holding on to hope that one day he would see his daughter again. And then they asked if she wanted to meet him. This is where Michelle's story takes a turn that reveals something profound about her character. She could have been angry, bitter, resentful. She could have refused contact, needed time to process, wanted nothing to do with the father she couldn't remember. And nobody would have blamed her. Instead, she said yes. The reunion was arranged quickly, but carefully. Mental health professionals were present to help both Joseph and Michelle navigate what would undoubtedly be an emotionally overwhelming experience. Joseph Newton was 66 years old when he received a phone call that would change his life. A detective from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office called him with news he had waited 43 years to hear. Mr. Newton, we've found your daughter. Michelle is alive, and she wants to meet you. Joseph later described that moment to reporters from WLKY, the same news station that had interviewed him in 1986 when he was still desperately searching. His voice cracked with emotion as he tried to put into words what it felt like to know his daughter was coming home. She's always been in my heart, he said. I can't explain that moment of that woman walking in and getting put my arms back around my daughter. The actual reunion was held in a private room at the sheriff's office. Privacy was essential. This wasn't a moment for cameras or crowds. This was a moment for a father and daughter who had been stolen from each other to finally connect. When Michelle walked into the room, Joseph stood. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. She was 46 years old, a fully grown woman with her own life, her own experiences, her own identity. But Joseph could see it. He could see the little girl he had lost in 1983. The shape of her face, the eyes that looked like his own, the features that connected them across 43 years of absence. It's hard to look at her as an adult, Joseph later told reporters, when I last saw her when she was a 3-year-old. They embraced, and in that embrace, 43 years of searching, of wondering, of hoping against hope finally came to an end. The reunion didn't magically erase the lost decades. It didn't suddenly restore the relationship they should have had. Joseph missed everything. Michelle's first day of school, her graduation, her first job, possibly her wedding, possibly the birth of grandchildren he never knew existed. Those moments can never be recovered. But What they could do was start building something new. They could begin the slow process again to know each other, of creating new memories, of finding out who they were to each other now. In this moment, Michelle brought family members Joseph had never met, extended family who had been part of her life all these years, completely unaware of the truth. Now they were meeting Joseph, seeing this man who represented a past that had been hidden from all of them. Joseph introduced Michelle to her own extended family in Kentucky. Aunts, uncles, cousins who had never stopped wondering about the little girl who disappeared. They welcomed her with open arms, with tears, with a love that had waited decades to be expressed. Over the following weeks, Michelle and Joseph spent hours together. They looked through old photo albums. Joseph showed her pictures of herself as a baby, as a toddler, before the day Deborah drove away and never came back. Michelle shared her own photo albums, letting Joseph see the milestones he had missed. It was painful. It was beautiful. It was complicated in ways that most people will never have to experience. And through it all, one question lingered. A question that would have to be answered in court. What would happen to Deborah Newton? On December 16th, 2025, Deborah Newton appeared in Jefferson County Court for her arraignment. She was 66 years old, dressed in jail-issue clothing, a far cry from the comfortable retirement life she had been living in Florida just weeks earlier. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches. Curious onlookers who had followed the case in the news wanted to see the woman who had successfully hidden for 43 years. And in the gallery, sitting side by side, were Joseph and Michelle Newton. Think about that image for a moment. The father who never stopped searching. The daughter who never knew she was missing. Both present to face the woman who had created this entire situation. The charge was read: felony custodial interference. Under Kentucky law, this crime has no statute of limitations. It doesn't matter that 43 years have passed. The law recognizes that some wrongs don't expire with time. Deborah's attorney entered a plea of not guilty, standard procedure and arraignment, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The DNA match, the paper trail, the confession of sorts that she had given to investigators when confronted with her true identity. The prosecution outlined their case. Deborah had taken Michelle under false pretenses in April 1983. She had failed to return to Joseph as promised. She had changed their identities and lived under assumed names for over 4 decades. She had denied Joseph his parental rights and Michelle her true identity. The defense argued that Deborah was Michelle's mother, that she had raised and cared for her daughter, that Michelle had lived a good life. But the law is clear. Being a biological parent doesn't give you the right to kidnap your child from the other parent. The question of bail became contentious. The prosecution argued that Deborah was an obvious flight risk. She had successfully evaded capture for 43 years. She had built entirely new identities for herself and her daughter. She had shown a willingness and ability to disappear. But ultimately, a family member posted bail, and Deborah was released pending trial. She would be required to wear an ankle monitor, check in regularly with probation officers, and remain in Kentucky. As she left the courtroom, Deborah and Michelle's eyes met. It was the first time they had seen each other since the arrest. The first time since Michelle learned the truth. What passed between them in that moment? Nobody knows. Was it guilt, shame, love, regret, all of the above? The cameras captured the moment. But they couldn't capture the complexity of emotions between a mother and daughter whose relationship had been built on both genuine love and profound deception. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for January 23rd, 2026. The trial date would be set after that. Legal experts predicted the case could take years to fully resolve. There were complex questions to answer. Questions about intent, about harm, about the nature of parental rights. But while the legal system ground forward with its procedures and protocols, the real story was happening outside the courtroom. It was happening in quiet conversations between a father and daughter who were learning to know each other. It was happening in the hearts of a family, trying to make sense of 4 decades of absence. And it was raising questions that extended far beyond one family in Kentucky. In the weeks following the arrest and reunion, Michelle Newton faced perhaps the most difficult decision of her life. She had to choose how to move forward, not just legally, but emotionally. On one side was Joseph, the father she didn't remember but who clearly loved her, who had never stopped searching, who represented a past that had been stolen from her. On the other side was Deborah, the woman who had raised her, who had been her mother for 43 years, who had created an entire life for her, even if that life was built on lies. Michelle made a choice that revealed something profound about her character. In an interview with WLKY, she explained her decision. My intention is to support them both through this and try to navigate and help them both just wrap it up so that we can all heal. Hopefully, there's just apologies and start healing. Think about that statement. Michelle wasn't choosing sides. She wasn't declaring one parent right and the other wrong. She was recognizing the incredibly complex reality of her situation. Yes, Deborah had committed a crime. Yes, Joseph was a victim. But Michelle had lived an entire life with Deborah as her mother. That relationship, however began, was real to her. This is what makes parental abduction cases so different from stranger abductions. When a child is taken by a stranger, there's a clear victim and a clear perpetrator. The child is rescued. The kidnapper goes to prison. And while trauma certainly exists, the moral framework is clear. But when the kidnapper is a parent, when the child is raised with love, even within the context of that crime, the lines become blurred. Michelle had to grapple with the reality that the woman who committed a terrible crime against her father was also the woman who bandaged her childhood scrapes, who attended her school plays, who was there for every milestone of her life. Michelle attended Deborah's court appearances. She sat in the gallery, offering the kind of silent support that must have been confusing to observers. Why would the victim support her kidnapper? But Michelle understood something that many people struggle to grasp. She could acknowledge that what Deborah did was wrong, while also acknowledging that Deborah had been her mother for 43 years. Both things could be true simultaneously. Joseph, remarkably, seemed to understand this too. He didn't demand that Michelle cut off contact with Deborah. He didn't force her to choose. He simply wanted to build a relationship with his daughter, whatever form that relationship might take. I just want to move forward and learn my family and learn my history and who I am, Michelle explained in interviews. That statement cuts to the heart of what this case is really about. Michelle had lived 46 years with one identity, one history, one understanding of who she was. Now she had to integrate an entirely different history, a different family, a different truth. She had to figure out how to be both the person she had been raised to be and Michelle Marie Newton, the daughter Joseph Newton had searched for since 1983. Psychologists who specialize in parental abduction cases describe this process as incredibly difficult. These survivors have to reconcile two competing realities. They often experience something called ambiguous loss, where they mourn the relationship they should have had with the parent they were taken from, while also feeling genuine love for the parent who took them. Michelle began the process of rebuilding her identity. She learned about her extended family in Kentucky. She discovered cousins she never knew existed, family traditions she had never been part of, stories about grandparents who had passed away before she could meet them. She also had to update all her legal documents, her driver's license, her Social Security records, her employment files. Everything that said she was one person now had to be changed to reflect her true identity. It was exhausting. It was overwhelming. But Michelle approached it with remarkable grace and resilience. And as the months passed, something unexpected began to happen. Michelle and Joseph started building a real relationship. It wasn't the father-daughter relationship they should have had. It couldn't be. Too much time had passed. Too many experiences had happened without the other present. But it was something. They talked on the phone regularly. They met for coffee, for lunch, for long walks where they just talked and learned about each other. Joseph introduced Michelle to his favorite restaurants, the places that held memories from her early childhood. Michelle shared her own life with Joseph, her career, her interests, the person she had become. And slowly, carefully, they began to create new memories together, not to replace the ones that were stolen, but to build something new from the wreckage of the past. Michelle Newton's story isn't unique. It's rare for cases like this to remain unsolved for 43 years, but parental abduction happens far more frequently than most people realize. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Parental abduction accounts for approximately 200,000 cases in the United States every year. Most are resolved relatively quickly, within days or weeks. But some, like Michelle's case, drag on for years or even decades. Angeline Hartmann, Director of Communications at NCMEC, addressed this issue directly when Michelle's case broke. One of the biggest misconceptions about family abduction cases is that the children are safe and not really missing because they're with a parent. At NCMEC, we know that there's a lot of emotion behind these cases, and these scenarios can be unpredictable and dangerous. These children are missing and living a life on the run with their kidnapper. They're forced to lie about who they are and are often isolated. This is a truth that Michelle's case brings into sharp focus. She wasn't safe. She was a victim. The fact that Deborah raised her with love doesn't change the fact that Joseph's parental rights were violated, that Michelle's right to know her own identity was stolen, that an entire family was torn apart by one person's decision. Michelle's case also highlights the importance of never giving up. The Crime Stoppers tip that led to solving this case came 43 years after the abduction. For decades, most people would have assumed the case was impossible to solve after that much time. But Colonel Steve Healy of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office emphasized the importance of that single tip. People think calling in tips is snitching. It isn't. You're helping victims. You're helping families. This case proves that one phone call can change a life. One phone call. One person who saw a missing person poster or an age-progressed image or a news story and thought that looks familiar. One person who decided to act on that instinct instead of dismissing it. The case also raises uncomfortable questions about our systems. How did Deborah manage to build entirely new identities for herself and Michelle? How did she obtain documents, enroll Michelle in school, navigate bureaucracy for over 4 decades without anyone questioning her paperwork? The answer reveals vulnerabilities in our identification systems. In the 1980s and even into the 1990s, obtaining fraudulent documents was as difficult as it is today. Social Security numbers could be fabricated or borrowed. Birth certificates could be forged. School systems didn't have the robust verification processes they have now. Deborah likely obtained a birth certificate from Michelle under a different name, possibly using the identity of a deceased child, a common tactic among identity fraudsters. From there, she could build an entire paper trail. School records, medical records, eventually, a driver's license and Social Security card. By the time modern systems with better verification were implemented, Michelle's false identity was already established. She had decades of documentation backing up her assumed name. There was no reason for anyone to question it. This case has prompted calls for better information sharing between state agencies, for improved verification systems, and for more robust checks when documents are first issued to children. But perhaps the most important legacy of Michelle's case is the message it sends to other families with missing children. Don't give up. Don't assume that because years have passed, or because the official investigation has slowed, or because people tell you to move on, that you should stop hoping. Joseph Newton could have given up in 2000 when the case was dismissed. He could have given up in 2005 when Michelle was removed from the missing person database. He could have accepted that his daughter was gone forever. But he didn't. He kept her memory alive. He kept hoping. And 43 years later, that hope was rewarded. So let me ask you this. Drop your answer in the comments, because I genuinely want to know what you think about this. Michelle Newton now has to navigate 2 families, 2 histories, 2 different truths about who she is. She's building a relationship with Joseph, the father who never stopped searching for her. But she's also maintaining a relationship with Deborah, the mother who raised her but committed a crime to do so. If you were in Michelle's position, what would you do? Would you cut off contact with the person who kidnapped you, even if they were also the person who raised you with love? Or would you, like Michelle, try to support both sides and hope for healing? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And be honest. There's no right answer here. This is one of the most complex ethical and emotional situations a person could face. Also, how do you think the justice system should handle Deborah Newton's case? She committed a serious crime. She violated Joseph's parental rights. She forced Michelle to live a lie for 43 years. But she's also 66 years old now. She raised Michelle, and Michelle herself isn't calling for a harsh punishment. Should Deborah face significant prison time? Should she receive probation given her age and Michelle's wishes? Should the punishment account for the fact that she was, by all accounts, a good mother even though she was a criminal? Drop your opinion below. I'm reading every comment. And if you found this story as compelling as I did, if it made you think about family, identity, and the nature of forgiveness, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. And subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next deep documentary. Because this channel is about more than just telling stories. It's about keeping these cases alive, about making sure victims aren't forgotten, about showing that justice can prevail even after decades of waiting. As Michelle's story continues to unfold, there are still many unanswered questions. Questions that may never have clear answers. Questions that families affected by parental abduction grapple with every day. Why did Deborah do it? What drove her to take Michelle and disappear in April 1983? Was it fear? Was it anger? Was it a custody dispute that wasn't documented in the legal record? Was Joseph abusive, as some defenders of parental abductors claim? Or was this simply a case of one parent deciding they wanted sole control? We may never know the full truth. Deborah hasn't given extensive interviews. She hasn't explained her motivations publicly. And until she does, if she ever does, we're left to speculate. What we do know is that whatever her reasons, the method she chose was illegal and harmful. If Deborah had legitimate concerns about Joseph's parenting, there were legal avenues to address them. Family courts, custody arrangements, supervised visitation, if necessary. Instead, she chose to erase Joseph from Michelle's life entirely, to deny a father his child and a child her father. That choice had consequences that rippled across 4 decades. Another question, what about Michelle's identity moving forward? She's 46 years old now. She's lived her entire adult life as one person. Does she legally change back to Michelle Newton? Does she hyphenate names? Does she keep the name she's known by professionally? There's no easy answer. Some survivors of parental abduction reclaim their birth names as an act of reclaiming their stolen identity. Others keep the names they grew up with because that's who they are to themselves and everyone they know. Michelle will have to make that choice. And whatever she decides, it will be the right choice for her. Then there's the question of Deborah's husband, the man who married Sharon Neely and had no idea his wife was actually a wanted fugitive. How does he process this revelation? Did he stay with Deborah after her arrest? Is he standing by her side? Or did the truth shatter their relationship? We don't have those answers. The family has understandably kept many details private. But imagine being in his position. Waking up one day to discover that the woman you've shared your life with has been living a lie the entire time. That her name isn't what you thought. That she has a past she never mentioned. That she's wanted for kidnapping her own daughter. How do you reconcile that? How do you trust again after betrayal of that magnitude? And what about Michelle's children, if she has any? The case reports haven't confirmed whether Michelle has children of her own. But if she does, imagine being a child or grandchild and discovering that your mother or grandmother was actually a missing person, that your entire family history was built on false information, that your grandmother is now facing felony charges. These ripple effects extend far beyond just Michelle and Joseph. They touch everyone connected to this family. They raise questions about truth, about forgiveness, about how we define family when biology, love, and crime intersect in complicated ways. If there's one message that Michelle Newton's case sends to families dealing with missing children, it's this: never stop hoping. Never stop searching. Never assume it's too late. Joseph Newton could have given up dozens of times over the 43 years his daughter was missing. He could have accepted the dismissal of charges in 2000 as the end of the story. He could have moved on when Michelle was removed from missing person databases in 2005, but he didn't. He kept Michelle's memory alive. He kept her case in the public eye through interviews with local news. He never stopped being her father, even when he had no idea where she was or if he would ever see her again. And in 2025, when that phone call finally came, he was ready. He was there. He opened his arms to a daughter he hadn't seen since she was 3 years old. and he welcomed her home. For families with missing children, that's the dream. That's what keeps them going through years of dead ends and false leads and crushing disappointments. Organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children work tirelessly to make those reunions possible. They create age-progressed images. They maintain databases. They follow up on tips, no matter how old the case is. Chief Deputy Colonel Steve Healy emphasizes in his statements to the press, "No family seeking help is ever turned away. We will always follow up. We will always investigate, because we believe every child deserves to come home." That commitment matters. That refusal to give up on cold cases matters. Because as Michelle's case proves, resolution can come at any time. The age-progressed image created by Nmec's forensic artist was crucial to solving this case. When that image was shared on social media on Michelle's 45th birthday, it reached the right person at the right time. Someone recognized the face. Someone made a phone call. Without that age-progressed image, would the case have been solved? Maybe, maybe not, but it increased the odds. It gave people a visual reference, a way to imagine what a missing 3-year-old might look like 4 decades later. This technology has advanced significantly in recent years. Forensic artists use sophisticated software that accounts for aging patterns, genetic traits passed from parents, and statistical modeling of how faces typically change over time. For families with long-term missing children, these images provide hope. They provide a tool for recognition. They keep the case alive in the public consciousness. If you've never looked at missing person databases, consider doing so. Visit the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's website. Look at the faces. Share the posts on social media. You never know when you might recognize someone. That single act of attention, that willingness to look and really see, could be what brings someone home. Let's talk about that anonymous tip caller. The person who saw Sharon Neely in the Villages, Florida, and thought she looked familiar. The person who had probably seen the age-progressed image of Michelle Newton circulating on social media. That person had a choice. They could have dismissed the resemblance as coincidence. They could have thought, it's probably nothing, or I don't want to get involved, or it's been 40 years. They probably already know where she is. But they didn't. They picked up the phone. They called the Crime Stoppers tip line. They provided a name, a location, a description. And that single phone call changed everything. It led to surveillance of Deborah Newton. It led to the DNA comparison with Deborah's sister. It led to the confirmation that Sharon Neely was actually Deborah Newton. It led to Michelle being found. It led to a reunion 43 years in the making. One phone call. This is why Crime Stoppers programs exist. This is why tip lines stay open even on cold cases that seem impossible to solve. Because sometimes all it takes is one person who notices something and decides to speak up. The anonymous caller will never receive public recognition. Their name will never be in news reports. But they played a crucial role in bringing a daughter home to her father. And that caller probably received a portion of the $75,000 reward that had been posted for information leading to Michelle's location. Crime Stoppers rewards are paid out anonymously to protect tipsters. The money matters, certainly. But more than that, the impact matters. Imagine knowing you helped solve a 43-year-old missing person case. Imagine knowing you helped reunite a family. That knowledge is worth more than any reward money. This case should serve as encouragement to anyone who has ever seen something suspicious, notice a resemblance to a missing person poster, or wondered if they should call in a tip. Call it in. Always call in. The worst that happens is it turns out to be nothing. The tip doesn't pan out. The person isn't who you thought they were. No harm done. But the best that happens? You change lives. You solve cases. You bring people home. Detective agencies need the public's help. They can't be everywhere. They can't see everything. Cold cases often go unsolved not because investigators don't care, but because they don't have information to work with. Your tip might be the missing piece. Your observation might be the detail that cracks the case wide open. Don't assume someone else will call. Don't assume the police already know. Don't talk yourself out of making that call because you're worried about being wrong. Call every time. Without fail, Michelle Newton is home today because someone made that choice. Someone saw something and they acted on it. That's the power of community vigilance. That's the power of people who care enough to get involved. As Deborah Newton's case moves through the court system, there's an ongoing debate about what justice should look like in situations like this. That on one hand, Deborah committed a serious crime. She kidnapped her daughter. She violated a court order, assuming there was one. She denied Joseph his parental rights for 43 years. She forced Michelle to live under a false identity. Those are not minor offenses. Under Kentucky law, custodial interference is a Class D felony. If convicted, Deborah could face 1 to 5 years in prison. Given her age, she's 66. Even a short prison sentence could be significant. But on the other hand, Deborah raised Michelle. By all accounts, she was a good mother. Michelle grew up loved, cared for, supported. She had a normal childhood and a normal adult life. She wasn't abused or neglected. The crime wasn't violent. Does that matter? Should it matter? Some argue that the fact Deborah was a good mother is irrelevant. The crime is the crime. Joseph lost 43 years with his daughter. That can never be recovered. Justice demands accountability, regardless of Deborah's age or the quality of care she provided. Others argue for mercy. Deborah is elderly. She's not a danger to society. Michelle herself isn't calling for a harsh punishment. Wouldn't probation, community service, and restitution to Joseph be more appropriate than prison time? There's no easy answer. Both perspectives have merit. What we do know is that justice in parental abduction cases is complex. These aren't stranger kidnappings where the moral lines are clear. These are situations where love and crime intersect, where the perpetrator is also someone the victim loves, where punishment affects not just the criminal but the entire family system. Michelle will have to watch her mother go through this legal process. She'll have to testify. Probably, she'll have to relive the moment she discovered her entire identity was false. She'll have to balance her loyalty to the woman who raised her with her understanding that what Deborah did was wrong. That's an impossible position to be in, and there's no outcome that will make everyone happy. If Deborah receives a harsh sentence, Michelle will suffer watching her mother go to prison. If Deborah receives a lenient sentence, Joseph may feel that justice hasn't been served, that 43 years of loss hasn't been adequately acknowledged. The court will have to weigh all these factors. They'll consider Deborah's age, her lack of criminal history beyond this offense, Michelle's wishes, Joseph's trauma, the severity of the crime, and the principle of accountability. Whatever they decide, it won't heal the past. It won't give Joseph back those 43 years. It won't give Michelle back the childhood she should have had with both her parents. But it will, hopefully, provide some sense of closure, some acknowledgement that what happened was wrong, even if figuring out the appropriate response is incredibly difficult. Michelle Newton's case teaches us several crucial lessons that extend far beyond one family story. First, parental abduction is real kidnapping. It's not a lesser crime just because the perpetrator is a parent. Children taken by their own parents are missing. They're victims. They deserve the same resources, the same urgency, the same commitment to finding them as children taken by strangers. For too long, law enforcement and society have minimized parental abduction. The assumption was that children were safe with their parents, that these were custody disputes rather than kidnappings, that resources were better spent on real abductions. Michelle's case proves how wrong that assumption is. She was robbed of her identity. She was robbed of knowing her father. She was forced to live a lie for 43 years. The fact that Deborah loved her doesn't change the harm that was done. Second, cold cases can be solved. Technology advances. People's memories are jogged by social media posts. Someone who was too young to remember a case in 1983 might be the person who recognizes an age-progressed photo in 2024. Never give up on cold cases. Never assume they're impossible to solve. Keep sharing information. Keep updating age-progressed images. Keep the stories alive. Third, community vigilance matters. The person who called the tip line about Sharon Neely wasn't a detective or an investigator. They were an ordinary citizen who noticed something and decided to act. We all have a role to play in keeping our communities safe. We all have a responsibility to be aware of missing person cases and to speak up if we see something suspicious. Fourth, identity is complicated. Michelle Newton struggled to integrate her two histories, the one she lived and the one that was stolen from her, is something many survivors of parental abduction face. She's not just reclaiming a name, she's reclaiming an entire identity, an entire family, an entire past that she was denied. That's not something that happens overnight. It's a process that will likely take years, possibly a lifetime. And finally, forgiveness is personal. Michelle's choice to maintain a relationship with Deborah, while also building one with Joseph, is hers to make. Nobody else can tell her the right way to feel about the woman who raised her or the father she doesn't remember. Survivors of trauma get to decide how they heal. They get to decide who they forgive and who they don't. They get to decide what relationships they maintain and what boundaries they set. Michelle's path is her own, and watching her navigate it with such grace and compassion is a testament to her character. As of now, Deborah Newton is out on bail, awaiting trial. She's required to stay in Kentucky, wear an ankle monitor, and check in regularly with authorities. Her preliminary hearing has been held, and a trial date will be set soon. Michelle Newton is building relationships with both sides of her family. She's getting to know Joseph, learning about the life she would have had in Kentucky, discovering family traditions and stories she was never part of. She's also maintaining contact with Deborah, though the nature of that relationship has undoubtedly changed. You can't learn that your entire identity was a lie and have things stay the same. Joseph Newton, at 66 years old, is finally getting to know his daughter. He's meeting grandchildren he never knew existed. He's introducing Michelle to her extended family in Kentucky. He's creating new memories while grieving the ones that were stolen. It's not the ending any of them would have chosen. The ideal ending would have been Deborah never taking Michelle in the first place. The ideal ending would have been Michelle growing up knowing both her parents, having all those childhood memories intact. But life rarely gives us ideal endings. Instead, we get complicated ones, messy ones, endings that require forgiveness and grace, and the willingness to build something new from broken pieces. That's what the Newton family is doing now. They're taking the fragments of 4 decades of separation and trying to create something whole. It won't ever be perfect. It won't ever fully heal the wounds of the past. But it's something. And sometimes something is enough. So where does this leave us? What do we take away from Michelle Newton's story? Perhaps the most important takeaway is this. Families are stronger than we think. The bond between parent and child, even when separated by decades and distance and lies, doesn't completely break. It bends. It stretches. It gets buried under layers of falsehood. But it doesn't disappear entirely. Joseph never stopped being Michelle's father, even when he had no contact with her for 43 years. Even when he didn't know where she was or if she was alive. Even when the legal system gave up on his case. He remained her father. That bond persisted. And when they were finally reunited, that bond had a foundation to build on. Not the foundation they should have had. Childhood memories, shared experiences, a lifetime of love. But a foundation nonetheless. Biology, blood, an unspoken connection that survived 4 decades of absence. Michelle's story also reminds us that truth matters. Living a lie, even a comfortable one, comes with a cost. Michelle didn't know she was paying that cost for 46 years. She didn't know she was missing out on an entire family, an entire history, an entire identity that belonged to her. But now that she knows, she can reclaim it. She can build relationships she was denied. She can learn about where she came from. She can integrate all the pieces of who she is into a complete picture. That process is painful. It's difficult, but it's also necessary. Because living in truth, even when that truth is complicated and messy, is better than living in a lie. For other families dealing with parental abduction, Michelle's story offers hope. It proves that reunions can happen even after decades. It proves that love can survive impossible circumstances. It proves that the effort to keep cases alive, to keep sharing information, to keep hoping matters. And for the rest of us, Michelle's story is a call to action. Pay attention to missing person cases. Share posts about missing children. Look at the faces on those flyers. And if you see something that seems off, If someone looks familiar, if you notice something suspicious, call it in. You might be the person who brings someone home. You might be the reason a family like the Newtons gets their miracle. If this story moved you, if it made you think about family and identity and the nature of forgiveness, I need you to do something for me. First, leave a comment. Tell me what you think about Michelle's situation. Would you forgive the parent who kidnapped you if they had raised you well? How do you think Deborah's case should be handled? What would you do if you were in Michelle's position? I'm reading every single comment, and I want to know your perspective. This is one of those stories that doesn't have easy answers, and hearing different viewpoints helps all of us think more deeply about these issues. Second, if you found value in this documentary, hit that like button. The algorithm needs to know that people care about these stories. Every like helps this video reach more people, which means more awareness about parental abduction, which means more chances that other missing children will be recognized and brought home. Third, and this is important, share this video. Send it to someone who's interested in true crime, missing person cases, or stories about family. Share it on your social media. Post it in groups that discuss these topics. Because the more people who know about cases like Michelle's, the better chance we have of solving other cold cases. And finally, subscribe to this channel. We bring you in-depth documentaries about cases that deserve attention. We don't just read off Wikipedia. We research. We dig deep. We tell stories that honor the people involved and try to make sense of complicated situations. If you want more content like this, if you want to be part of a community that cares about justice and truth and bringing people home, hit that subscribe button right now. And if you're wondering what to watch next, I've got you covered. Check out the video on the screen about another case where nothing was as it seemed. Or watch the one about the case that took 30 years to solve because of a single fingerprint. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about Michelle Newton's story. Thank you for being part of a community that believes missing people matter, that families deserve answers, and that it's never too late for the truth to come out. Until next time, stay aware, stay compassionate, and never stop hoping for the impossible. Because as Michelle Newton's case proves, sometimes the impossible happens. I'm watching every comment. Let me know where you're watching from, and tell me what you think about this case. See you in the next one.